Good evening and welcome to the Monday, January 26, 2015 Burnsville Planning Commission. The first item on this evening's agenda is the adoption of this evening's agenda. Staff, do you have any addition or changes to tonight's agenda?
None from staff.
Commissioners?
No, Mr. Chair.
With no changes, we would stand for a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Thomas.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Benke. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay, and the motion carries. The second item on this evening's agenda is approval of the minutes from our January 12th, 2015 meeting. Those minutes were provided to us in the background. Staff, do you have any changes or adjustments to the minutes as
None.
presented?
None from staff, Mr. Chair.
Staff? Commissioners?
I had one question and possible comment. Jenny, since this is an HOC, and I realize that council has already heard and acted on this, but since it is an HOC, and also because these are really condensed, wouldn't it have been good to talk about the Planning Commission discussing the architectural work that the applicant did for that building? Wouldn't that have been a good piece to have had in here, in the minutes?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Benke, you're talking about under item number 4.
I'm sorry, yes, I should have been more specific. Under item 4, about halfway down, or about two-thirds of the way down on page 2, it says, Commissioners discuss the use of the building now in the future, parking, proposed landscaping, mechanical equipment. Planning Commission found the deviations reasonable. We basically did thank them for the work that they did on their architecture, given that it's an HOC 2, but that was edited out or lost from here.
Commissioner, we certainly can add that to the minutes, that we can certainly add the word architectural materials as part of the
Well, it was
discussion.
actually more of a style. I mean, it was, the building, they worked pretty hard, I thought, at creating an architectural style that didn't simply just mesh with what the existing building was.
Sure, we can use the terminology as you stated, architectural style and cohesiveness.
Sure.
Is that what you're looking for?
Well, actually, cohesive is the wrong word there too, because if anything, it's a completely different kind of architecture, but the way they put it together seems to work well.
Okay.
So I think just
Style.
I think just an
Architectural
architectural style
Okay.
more than anything else.
So
Was it?
we would present the minutes as amended per the discussion.
Correct, adding the word architectural style under item number 4 as discussed.
And with that, I would stand for a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Benke,
Second.
second by Commissioner Thomas. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay, and the motion carries. The third item on this evening's agenda is a public hearing, and it is an application by the City of Burnsville for an ordinance amending Title 10, Chapter 22 of the zoning ordinance, eliminating drive-in theaters, bus terminals, and mini storage as conditional uses in the B3 district. And with that said, Ms. Jenny Faulkner is going to be presenting this evening. Jenny, you have our full and undivided attention.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. This item is an item that the City Council asked the staff to look at in regards to zoning in the B3 areas. In your packet, you have the different commercial zoning districts highlighted, and the most of the area, I just want to describe it here, is B3 is primarily located around County Road 42 in the Burnsville Center trade area. There also is an area off of Highway 13 and 35W, kind of the northeast corner where Skateville is, and some office buildings and the Holiday gas station going all the way over just to the east side of Nicollet Avenue. There's also some B3 in more sporadic locations all along Highway 13 to the east, and then some neighborhood B3 areas along Burnsville Parkway and County Road 5 up at 5 and 13. So those are the general areas that we're speaking to. And what council asked us to look at is the uses in the B3 and are they obsolete and what's still appropriate there now that the community is fully developed. Specifically, they asked us to look at mini storage. And in the information we provided to council this summer and again this fall, we included market information. What do other cities do with mini storage? And it really was kind of all over the board. You have in your background packet that survey of information. A couple of cities allow them in commercial. Most just have them in their industrial areas. So following that guidance, the council gave direction to remove mini storage from the B3 zoning district. Along with that, other uses that didn't seem appropriate anymore, again, now that we're fully developed, we know what size the lots are going to be, we know where most of the buildings are. It seemed that the use of bus terminals and drive-in theaters in those locations were no longer appropriate as well. So City Council was supportive of that. You have the red line version of the proposed ordinance amendment that removes those uses from the B3 zoning district. I just want to let you and the public know that we did send notices to all of the existing mini storage owners that could be affected, although most of these are not in B3, but we did send notices to them upon request of the council to all business owners and operators. So here on the overhead is the location of the current mini storage facilities in the city. There are 8 of them. None of them are in a B3 except for number A, and that one is zoned through a PUD. So they still would be conforming under the terms of their planned unit development. So basically, this would prohibit any new mini storage from locating within the B3 areas. They still would be allowed in the industrial areas and other areas of the city. With that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for any questions, and this is a public hearing.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Ms. Faulkner before we open the public hearing?
No, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Benke?
Nope.
No? Okay. With that said, this is a public hearing, and at this point, I would like to open up our meeting to a public hearing and have anyone from our audience come up and ask us questions or have some discussion based around this topic. I do know we had some inquiries earlier this evening about bus terminals, and I just kind of wanted to point out, per hopefully the information presented, it's just the B3 general business district, a small portion of the city, kind of higher end retail focused areas that we're eliminating these three uses as conditional uses. So, Ms. Faulkner.
Mr. Chair, if I can elaborate that too. Any of the other uses, the theaters or the bus terminals that are in other zoning districts will not be affected.
Okay. I guess with that, I will close the public hearing, since seeing no one to come up and speak. Commissioners, your pleasure. Discussion? I would stand for a motion.
Go ahead. Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that let me find it here, that the Planning Commission recommends to City Council the approval of the ordinance amending Title 10, Chapter 22, of the zoning ordinance eliminating drive-in theaters, bus terminals, and mini storage as conditional uses in the B3 district as presented.
Moved by Commissioner Benke,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Thomas. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And the motion carries.
Thank you.
The fourth item on this evening's agenda, we seem to be rocketing through tonight's agenda, is a discussion of the architectural review tool. And our presenter this evening is Mr. Alan Brixis. Alan, thanks for making the drive from your part of the world to Burnsville. We always appreciate your time.
Thank you, Commissioners. Last December, Planning Commission met and we went over the architectural guideline inventory. Well, actually, these are architectural standards because most of the information that we provided to you was reflected in your current zoning code. So they're more than guidelines, they were actual laws. As part of that review, we demonstrated that the city has extensive standards for both architecture and building design. Section 1019 is our architectural and building design requirements for all our commercial districts. Chapter 1023, that's our industrial districts. 1030 is our sign code, and 1031 is extensive landscape requirements. In review of this, we had identified a number of topic areas that we wanted to discuss. On page 3 of our inventory, we identified design discussion points, which included defining acceptable accent materials, providing visual relief, establishing vertical treatment standards that define the building base, middle, and top, expanding on the mixed district regulations for mechanical equipment, providing a combination of exterior major materials, and also outlining some of the restricted materials. On page 35, we talked about site design discussion points as far as establishing light levels for our sidewalks, parking lots and entryways, requiring bicycle parking for commercial developments, establishing public open spaces as part of our commercial enterprises, as well as lighting, which would include decorative lighting. Upon our conclusion of our meeting, staff met, and we felt that the best way to approach this would be through establishing a building and site design compliance checklist. More frequently, you've encountered a lot of development that have gone through plan unit development asking for flexibility in site design, building design, etc. And we feel that in exchange, or rather than establish more regulation, we establish some guidelines to determine whether they meet or exceed the performance standards that we're most interested in, that being the building and site design elements that I just raised as far as those discussion points. What we did is we prepared a checklist, and I'll take you through that right now. The first element we wanted to give greater attention to is building facade, and we broke that down into visual relief, distinct modules, and building materials. We established a definition for building base by establishing ground level accents, establishing a pronounced building entrance. Please note that the italics elements are existing performance standards are minimum. When we look at these, we provide these visual photographs to provide a greater or clearer explanation of what we're trying to accomplish. We want something more than just the minimum when we talk about a plan unit development or conditional use. The second was defining the middle with using windows, awnings, arcades, porticos, or canopies. Again, we have minimum standards for windows as part of a portion of the facade, but we do not mandate a recessed or projected window. We do not mandate the awning. So we will be looking for these things as elements to score points in addition to support any flexibility we offer. Defining the top of the building using cornices, eaves, design parapets. Illuminated accent pieces are an option within our sign code, or variable building heights. And again, we think that the photographs that we provide a clear distinction of what we feel is the appropriate or exceeds those standards that currently exist. Moving on to distinct modulars. We currently have ordinance language that say with every 100 feet or 100 feet of length of building, we provide some kind of variation in depth, change of materials, those type of features. And we're looking at doing that with this. We've also added or provided an explanation of what those vertical treatments might do to break up the building. They may include columns, building offsets, facade depth changes, corner treatments, changes in materials. And we listed what we have here as our minimum, and HOC is even has a more restrictive standard. But when we talk about these buildings, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that variation, those shade lines, those changes in appearance. Use of projection windows, use of awnings or canopies are also modular distinctions. And again, we kind of highlight that some of the things as far as canopy with the Walmart. We have brought in a couple of photographs that are not specific to Burnsville to add that incentive. And then we have the canopies and the awnings over windows. Now, I understand that the Jared that we have here is not necessarily our best example, but it does provide those visual reliefs as far as the breakup of the building. The building materials, we have a major building material. We also have secondary, and we also have accent materials as minimum standards, but we do not necessarily ask for combinations of building materials. And as such, when we talked about this, we set our minimum standard as meeting the 1019-1 or 1023-1. But then we talked about enhanced building materials, which would exceed, where we would have 60% to 100% of brick, stone, or glass. We feel that that is a preferred option above the EIFS or stucco. Then if they could pursue a enhanced secondary material where 20 to 50% are brick, stone, or glass with the use of something else, so that we're looking at either combinations or some variation in building materials. And then finally, the use of accent materials to provide some color, some relief, some attention or detail that may be unique to that building. Our next element is the roof design. That we talked about this. We like the variations in roofs. We like the different treatments as far as cornices. We like the various screen components when we talk about rooftop equipment. Each one of these elements is something that we're looking for as far as some variation that we would look for in exchange for any kind of zoning flexibility through a plan unit development. With regard to lighting, we want to look at decorative lighting. We want to look at it on a pedestrian scale. We'd like to look at it as hooded and contributing to the appearance of the building. We'd look at downlighting, so to avoid those glare components. And so those are the areas of issue that we've identified. Bicycle parking speaks for itself, that we want to start seeing the integration of some bicycle parking standards within each commercial industrial area. The location should be in close proximity to the entrance. It should be integrated into the overall design. It cannot become an obstruction for pedestrian movement in or around the buildings, so they don't become an actual barrier rather than an amenity. Finally, our common spaces. Steve, I took your annotated comments and your specific comments regarding what we dealt with CBS, and we've kind of built them in. We want the common areas to be related to the building entrance. We want them to be related to the public paths. We want them to provide seating areas, dining areas, landscaped public art. Public spaces should be accessible to pedestrian ways, on-site parking, or building entrance, so they're actually become part of that access, or it's actually become actual usable common space. And then when we talk about landscaping, we're talking about working our perimeter landscaping in size and species that will contribute to the building district distinct modules. The example that we had that everyone disliked was the Walgreens, where we just had the U's at the base with no contribution to the vertical components of the buildings. So those are some of the things we're looking to enhance. The use and define these as far as public open spaces, common spaces, both pedestrian ways as well as patios or plaza areas. Again, we've tried to take our best examples of landscaping that we really liked. One is, again, this is the Walmart. This is the restaurant, but this one we pulled from outside the community just to give that entryway component, both color and design. We narrowed our checklist down to 5 pages to kind of highlight the areas that we felt were most important and what came out of the Planning Commission discussion of our overall guidelines. We would look for the Planning Commission to give us comments and additions to these, but we are not looking at changing the ordinance. We felt that using these as guidelines gives us a little more discretion than if it's an actual ordinance, and a variance would, for any flexibility, would be required otherwise. With that, I'll try to take any questions.
Commissioners, why don't we start with questions for Mr. Brixis, and then we'll probably have questions for Ms. Faulkner.
Sure.
You want to start, Mr. Ranky? Go ahead.
I have questions. Alan, thank you very much, and especially the point that you did read what I sent you, and that there was actually something good in there too. I do want to say, keep in mind that as critical as I can be, I'm my own worst critic of my own work. So just keep in mind that I do this to myself too. I guess I'm a little concerned with the checklist thing, and I want to talk about it in a little bit broader sense. When I go into a city and I am putting a new building in, a new single family, I'm going to use a single family because that's more what we're doing right now. And the city has defined envelopes. The homes all tend to fit that, to max that out. And when the city then decides that what they've created allows too much and they change it, the buildings tend to fit the envelope again. And it's almost like when you start to put something like this together, I'm not saying this is bad, I'm just saying that I think there might be parts of it that personally I might like to see a little different, that we're starting to create an architecture in the city, well, that becomes a little homogeneous because it all sort of matches what the checklist, or tries to match, because when people come in, they go, oh, well, we can follow the checklist and we'll get approved. So that's a bother to me because I don't believe that architecture can be created by a checklist. And I'm making that as a very blanket statement.
Steve, I think my biggest concern when we took on this project is that we have a lot by ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, ordinance is law, so you come in and you want to vary at all from that, you need a variance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's awful difficult to argue that a variance would be justified even with, under the current language, is the use reasonable and practical difficulties that are not economic regarding building design.
Right.
In that respect, I think going to this checklist and making it more of a guideline rather than a actual ordinance gives the architect greater flexibility in trying to demonstrate that they can meet these. That's why we are not suggesting that we adopt these as ordinances, but to have it as a guideline or a checklist that we can demonstrate. The other thing that I think we have tried to accomplish here is we tried to, by giving some ranges or flexibilities in those type of arrangements, their application, we try to turn back to the architect that artistic design component. If you meet these in general, or if you just meet our minimum ordinance, that's one thing. But if you're asking for us to give flexibility in parking numbers or other components, we would like to get some amenity back, and that's what we're looking at trying to do here.
And I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
I think any time that we're varying from what is expected, that we should be getting back.
Yeah.
I guess my point, I think, was that I feel like almost this is too much, and I think sometimes parts of the ordinance might even be too much, to the point where I almost feel like if there was language that might say, or other defined architectural style, or other presented, or created, I mean, something that allows the designer to realize right from the start that yes, these are guidelines, but yet if you got another idea, and WSB's building I think is a prime example, because it probably meets some of these, but it certainly doesn't meet all of them with the style that they brought in.
I can really concur. In another community I was working in, we had a number of buildings, and they all were brick, and they all were very attractive, and they all had resembled had kind of this appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started looking a lot alike, and finally one of my council members says, can we get a building that doesn't look the same? So that's some of the trial things that we have to encounter. And I think well, maybe there's a way to build something in here as a guideline that says, but the issue that we're always against is, what if you get a really architecturally significant building that's ugly?
Well, I agree.
We're trying to balance both of them.
I agree.
I think in doing that, we we've tried our best, but if you-
Well-
to define what that architecturally significant building is that goes beyond our ordinance that we think, then
Well,
you know.
but at what point isn't it before a body like this and then the council where, I mean, architecture is a personal
Yes.
decision,
exactly.
definitely. And that's the hardest part with this whole thing is what you like, I might not, what you like, you might not, and it just sort of goes that way. But yet, we are bringing it to a body like this. We do have the ability to have an audience that talks about it if it's something that is significant enough that people see, and if the dialogue can happen, I think that some of that can take care of itself. Here, I think that the point you made about the picture in the middle here, that the cursor's on, is extremely valid because that isn't Burnsville. That is another city. That's a place where they're trying to fill in a downtown neighborhood or something like that. And I'm struck with what's happened before, where the proverbial Burnsville brick was the complaint that the developers threw back at us, where everything needed to be the brown brick or the reddish brown brick, and it's like, well, no, it doesn't have to be. It just seems to be what everybody uses to try and get something passed. And I'm just looking for something here that can both encourage the diversity, but yet give us the higher standard.
Mr. Becky, well, I'm going to go to Ms. Faulkner and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
Okay?
If I could, Commissioners, just add to that. The challenge here is coming up with a balance of kind of what we're trying to do with this review and something that adds value and is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So after your last discussion and our discussion and watching the council direction on this a couple of times, what we're trying to do is provide a tool that helps you to review the subjectivity of all the applications that come before you. And a building doesn't necessarily have to meet all of these. It's just, do they or don't they, and what do you think about that? I think so that the Planning Commission will have a discussion and kind of have the same, in the same context with the same verbiage, kind of about some of the same elements. Not what they are they good or they're bad? That will come from your discussion, and we're not expecting a developer to do all of these. We'll let them know if you want deviations, these are some things that you can do. So we're not trying to have all the buildings look alike. I totally understand what you're saying. That's not what we want at all. And the way the ordinance is, it does provide a lot of flexibility with the minimum standards, right? So this is a tool to help us all, staff, you, and the council understand how we review those applications when they come in.
Can we clarify that and come
Yeah.
back just a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jenny, can you, as this tool, is this a tool that you see an applicant getting right off the bat, and then you work through this with them, or is this something that as the application progresses and you complete this and it's part of our background? I'm trying to understand when this comes into play.
Sure, that's a good question, Mr. Chair. We envision giving this to a developer when we meet with them. So when they come in, they'll meet with staff many months before they'll make an application. We give them the ordinance, we go through, here's the requirements if you want to do this, here's what you need to do. At that time, we envision giving them this checklist with the photos. If you're asking for any deviations or conditional use permit, these are some things that we hold to a higher standard that we would expect that you would come in with. You can pick and choose, but when we do your review, this is what you're going to be judged on, I guess. Just to try to quantify something that is very subjective. That's
Yep.
what we're trying to do.
Right.
So as far as your staff report goes, this will be incorporated in some way, shape, or form. We're thinking we will take the sentences, the verbiage from here, and add that into the Planning Commission background. I think that was our last idea. We have yet to see how this all comes together, because you don't need all the pictures and stuff. Or we could make it an attachment. Those are our two options that we're thinking about. So we'll come back to you from the staff's perspective. Here's how we think they did this, to help ease your review.
Well, and
Thanks, Jenny.
Chair, that actually was one of my questions. Would it be you think it might be a good idea to put the onus on the developer to suggest ways that they've solved these as a problem for the ones that they've chosen to to follow. You know, if they think that, well, I've incorporated visual relief and we're going to put it in the report, maybe they, document it by saying, hey, here's a little snapshot of that part of the building that shows that we do. I don't know, I'm trying to throw out ideas here too, because
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I don't think anything precludes someone from coming in and saying, I have a design in my head that I think will fit this, and you'll be very proud of it, but it doesn't meet these good guidelines.
right.
When we start going through that PUD process, the whole idea of the PUD is, if you look at the intent and purpose of the plan unit development, is innovative building design, innovative site design, those kind of components. I think what this checklist is, I think it's broad enough to give artistic license to the architect or the engineer or the developer to say, I want something that speaks to my business and my business specifically. So I don't think that would be the case. The circumstances that we're working toward is we're just working toward, or actually say working against the lowest common denominator. I need to get in, and that's what I want.
Well, and that's what worries me, is that someone will come in and pick from column A and column B and column C, and they don't get architecture that way. It's simply a collection of parts. I mean, I'm struck, as this for an example, I have a person that I work with who believes that you buy crown molding, you buy molding for the floor, you buy molding here and here, and you give it to the trim carpenter, and you put it on the wall, and it looks good. And it might. It depends on the skill of the trim carpenter. But we're giving them some of those same kind of pieces here, but yet architecture is bigger than that. And I got to say, that's where I keep coming from it, because that's where I come from.
I think if you have a project where they believe the same that you do, Steve, we don't have to be concerned.
I agree.
The problem is we will have people that will just have a contractor and say, what's the minimum I can get by with?
That's what we're.
And that's what we're trying to at least avoid. We're trying to say, here's what our expectations are. I think that's the extent we can get to.
Well, and that brings me to my next question, Jenny, if you could. The second sentence of the background says, the intent of the review tool is to summarize the design elements the city considers to be enhancements above the standard regulations that will help guide decisions and applications. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that some of what we were doing here was going to enhance the existing regulations to start with, so that we were getting better buildings right from the beginning. We weren't getting office depots again. We weren't getting, and maybe some of these ordinances are going to keep that from happening again. But yet, that's sort of where I thought we were going with this to start with, that there was going to be a little bit higher standard just across the board. And then when someone wanted a PUD, they wanted deviations, well, that's the point where there's some give and take about what else is going to benefit the city for the benefit you're getting. So I guess that's just something I would like to see a little clarification on.
Commissioners, the direction that staff has taken from the council work session, there was varying opinions from the council. So the direction that staff takes is from the council as a whole. And the consensus of the council was to direct staff to prepare some review guidelines. I believe that would aid with the Planning Commission review, so the Planning Commission would have a discussion about these, to have something that we could use, a tool to help judge when a project comes in and is asking for deviations. What are the benefits? How are they going above and beyond? So that's the premise that staff put this together with.
Sure.
When this goes to council with you, we are going to ask the council if they want higher standards. There was not consensus and clear direction that we are to amend the ordinance. Oh, and the other thing they wanted was to keep it business friendly and not add extra steps to the process, and let the developers know up front what's expected. So that is the charge, the premise under which we put this together. If council does want higher standards, and of course they're watching this or soon will, then they can, if they give us the direction, have consensus to do that, then certainly we will work with that. And this is a good tool for that discussion, because a lot of things that Mr. Brixius has in this checklist are things that are above and beyond the ordinance minimum. So
Right.
if we want to make, I'll just use the first paragraph here, or the bottom paragraph under visual relief, using cornices, eaves, roof designs, if we want to make those ordinance requirements specific, we can. But right now, we're not doing that. But we will call them out as a review tool. And maybe we'll find once we get into this that, yeah, this is something that we want and we think should be a minimum. We won't know till we start using it and having more of that discussion.
Sure.
Good question.
And you're right, I did sort of have selective hearing about which person on the council was saying what about it too. So, thank you. I guess under something like modules, this is something that, when I read it, I thought, every 100 feet, how many buildings are even less than 100 feet? We can't even, at a building like that, we might not even have a module. And so I'm just curious about those standards, and that, again, I think we'll leave for the council to decide if they would like to see more direction. Personally, I would like to see something on the order of express structural modules, which generally tends to be in the 24, 25-foot range. I know that a couple of the images that I showed at the last meeting that Alan was here at, there was that much relief on the buildings. I thought a word like arcades could fit in here somewhere, as opposed, in addition to some of the other terms that you're using, like recessed and projected windows. One that's harder, I think, to communicate, I think, is the word rhythm. I think actually module is a better term, and I think that that's probably a more appropriate word like that. Under the roof design, I guess I was a little confused because I don't really see a roof on any of these per se. They're all flat roofs, so basically we're seeing parapets. And I guess I don't know if we're going to find any good examples where there actually is a roof there, at least something. But I just thought that if we're going to talk roofs, I thought that could be something that we would want to add an example for. Under lighting, I made a note that, at what point are we going to be a little bit more active in encouraging energy-efficient lighting? I know that the bulk of Burnsville Parkway is LED now, and including the bridges and pretty much everywhere. And, I think that's a direction that the city is at some point, I think the city would want to express even a little louder. On the bike paths, I guess I had a question about that. When we're putting in bike racks, is there an implication that there's a bike path to get there, or is it just that the people that might live nearby can ride their bikes to work?
And not in every case. Not in every case is there going to be a bike path. They may be sharing the street. They may be sharing the parking lot. It's just a matter of when they're going to patronize that business, they can actually ride their bike there and leave it in a safe environment.
And there again, I think that does encourage the energy efficiency from a little different standpoint, of course. I thought the common area was great. I thought the landscaping was excellent as well. I mean, I do think that the examples that you've used for both of them are terrific in terms of what we could achieve here. I guess that was really all I saw for the tool. I guess there was one other question I had, but it actually went back to the landscaping part that was the perimeter landscaping, Jenny. So it looks like there's only 3 places in Burnsville where it wasn't met at all, or it wasn't met, and 2 of them were recent. I guess what is the Able Training Center?
That's the fire station down with the.
Oh, of course.
From the Walmart.
Of course. So just curious then, if anybody can recall a building like Porter Creek where there's essentially sidewalk, parking lot with some landscaping, but then when you get to the patio, are they counting the landscaping in the patio itself to meet the standard, or are we using the edge of the patio, and is that some distinction that we would want to add here, or not?
Commissioners, I don't recall that specific example. I'm certainly familiar with the building and that there is landscaping on at least two of the sides that you mentioned,
Yeah.
the parking and the entrance side. I don't know. We would have to check and get back to you if they had deviations or not,
Well, this would indicate that
that they did not.
probably did not. And I think it comes down to a decision on how we're going to count.
Correct.
You know, for example, if there's a patio and the entire patio is counted, and I guess if it's coming to us as a PUD or as a conditional use permit, that becomes very easy for us. So I guess changing it really wasn't my goal here. It was more of a question about how that all works.
I believe on the Porter Creek example, they met the green space as I think about it, because on the westerly wall, there's plantings right up along the building.
Right.
On that wall too.
Right.
And because we've only had 3 of them, and two of them have patios.
yeah.
Yeah, so that, again, that was with a PUD.
Right.
That totally makes sense in that case. There's
Right.
added green space, around the patios and whatnot. Patios that are next to residential, those are generally a conditional use permit for outdoor seating, I think if it's over 50 seats or something.
And screening, I'm sure, and other
Exactly.
factors as well.
You
Yeah.
might want to leave that as is, because
Okay.
then you get to weigh the benefits and make sure the screening's adequate versus just changing the ordinance.
Yeah, I agree. I guess, okay, Brooklyn Park has 6 feet of width, and we don't really have a width requirement. Well, ours says not less than 6 feet.
Yeah, ours is 6 feet at 50% of the building. 50% of the perimeter.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, not obviously, it's likely we'll see something come in again with more work in the city, and just curious about how that would, well, I guess we'll see how it goes.
Commissioners, it's usually an issue with drive-throughs. That's the challenge. Most other buildings can handle the 50%, and they go well above and beyond that. The Able one, that's because they're burning it all the time, so
Yeah, we don't.
so nothing's going to survive there.
It's going to live there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
so-
think we worry about that one.
Probably
Other-
the one example that would actually qualify for a variance.
Yeah.
Otherwise, with the drive-throughs, those are conditional uses generally anyway, so those do come before you. It's an opportunity for you to get some benefit then if they're asking for that.
So I guess the only other thing I had was a question more about the idea of the checklist for a project that does not need a CUP or PUD or need a hearing before this body or the council, something that basically can just get a permit. How would the standards that we're talking about be applied there, since we're not seeing it?
Commissioners, when someone comes in for a building permit, we review it in regards to the ordinance, and the ordinance is the minimum. So if they meet those requirements, then that's what we issue them a permit for. We don't have any authority to not issue them a permit or have them do something that is above and beyond. That's not an ordinance requirement.
I think that goes back to the point I was after before about whether or not there should be higher standards now, and that's, again, that's personal opinion on my part, of course, but yet I'm here to express it.
And that can be a discussion we can have with the city council.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas, your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I come at it in a similar way as Commissioner Banky. I mean, I'm a professional that works on behalf of clients, and I like it. I like the idea of a checklist or guidelines that everyone can speak to as a common ground, and then we can review against it. We can have comprehensive discussions about it, all having, a similar platform to build those conversations from. So I like the idea of having this tool available to the applicants as they come into the city in general. In regard to the specific document in front of us, I just want to make sure it's comprehensive so that professional looks at it, the applicant looks at it, and all the items that are available that are applicable, and I think you've done this, Alan, are presented in this checklist that could have some leeway, stuff like that.
Our first run for staff, we had 2 checklists. The first checklist was everything in the zoning ordinance, and that was like 17 pages, and we thought, well, that's a little bit onerous.
Yep.
They have to go through code anyway. You have, your landscape requirements are terrific. I don't think you need to add anything more. If they meet those minimums, they're above and beyond most communities. Your architectural standards are fairly strong. I agree that there might be some tweaking opportunities there, but they're generally pretty comprehensive. Your sign requirements are very good too. This is just above and beyond your base zoning. We didn't feel, once we looked at the checklist, that we had to give them a checklist for everything in the ordinance. That's their responsibility to check that. And as such, we tried to hit the highlight areas that basically came out of our last discussion. How do we avoid the Office Depot appearance? We look at that. That's pretty much our poster child. We need landscaping at the perimeter. We need a variation of materials. We need some breakup of the wall massing. We need pedestrian components to it. We need bicycle parking. So that's why we got it down to 5 pages.
And I think it's well done. I understand you can't put everything in there. But within the context of this, my only thought is, if possible, early on you mentioned some minimum standards, and later you talk about ordinances that apply. I'm not familiar with the ordinances. If there's some small snippet out of there that could be brought forward as minimum standards, but also then further on, we don't even reference any ordinances if any apply. I would just think, as a professional, just if we establish those guidelines early on, we should carry them through all elements, either provide a minimum standard or an ordinance to reference to, at least as
In the case of
on the
bicycle
checklist.
parking, we don't have a mandatory bicycle parking, so there was not a standard to look at. The lighting styles, basically your ordinances, the way they're set up right now, is to avoid nuisance lighting, not necessarily add or contribute to aesthetics or architectural appeal of the building. That's why we left it the way it really got established. And so, in referencing the minimum standards, it probably won't have any direct correlation to what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay.
So that's
Well,
that's why some of them, when we had modulars, we actually had a minimum. So if they start going at greater intervals, we set.
But as a professional, I'd be sitting there looking at that bicycle parking. I'm like, oh, what's it say in the ordinance?
Yeah.
Maybe we should say we have no current ordinances. I mean, just, he could rack his brain over that for. And then it helps us too. It filters down all the way to us. Like,
Yep.
here I am as a planning commission member, and staff presents this applicant's building, and I would like to see the checklist attached to the staff report. I would like to have that stand alone in the report. If you want to supplement it with discussion, that's great, but I think that would be a good tool to have. We talked a little bit about that earlier. But going back to, I can look at that and say, oh, well, you know, not dealing with this every day, we don't have a bicycle parking ordinance, and I know that based on the checklist. Probably also comes through in the staff report because they do a wonderful job, but, you know, it's always helpful. I think that's about it. I think it's a great tool. More tools in the toolbox. It helps us build a discussion that is comprehensive and will end up in I would think, result in a better product for the city and the applicant. So, and the applicant knows, I mean, if he checks on, if he assumes he's got a yes or a E, and maybe staff report doesn't reflect that, I would hope that he would be prepared in his presentation to explain himself.
Right.
So,
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioner Thomas. I have just a few comments, and then I'll try to kind of summarize, I guess. So as a commissioner, I'll probably go about this slightly different than my other two colleagues. Couple of thoughts. I respect everything they've said from the standpoint of the architectural designs. I have a couple of other ways I look at this. Number one, it's really important to me that we, as we are going to try to do, as I've said before, we need to give them the answers to the test. They can't get to us and have us ask for something, or the word ugly, the building's ugly. That doesn't help anything at all at this point in the process. A couple of these things I do take, I question. One, and this may sound like a real minuscule point, but the bicycle parking. When I read the background, I started to pay a real close attention. I think we got this Thursday, so I was looking around Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the city. And today we have very few people that have bicycle parking. And I do a fair amount of biking myself from a personal exercise, but I don't bike around the 42 Burnsville shopping area because 42 scares me. And many people would say I scare easy, but the Target has bicycle racks, the library does, Planet Fitness does, and LA Fitness. The people that kind of may need, probably the only one there that's out of the I understand why the library and the fitness centers do. So I struggle a bit telling a business owner you must put in a bicycle rack. I believe that's a business owner's decision. I'm not going to sit there and quibble with somebody over what could be a very inexpensive piece. But that kind of goes with myself from the where does the government draw their line from a standpoint of what we're making somebody do, because I don't believe a bicycle rack has anything to do with the architectural look of the long term of the building. Number two, my thoughts on the landscaping. I appreciate everything that's being said about landscaping. I also need to state my opinions based around a landowner or a business owner. There has to be a way to maintain the property going forward. And I have been involved with situations where the city has required to put landscaping in a place that in the state of Minnesota gets covered in snow and gets covered in salt and cannot be maintained. And I think there has to be a happy medium there between what we're asking for landscaping and what can be realistically maintained from an operator standpoint. I just think that's an important piece. Other than that, I'm a fan of not adding to, I think we've got some pretty good ordinances today. I think we've discussed a little bit about, several times, unfortunately, we've referred to an empty building in the city of Burnsville now that may or may not meet our standards. I think we all need to not have our head in the sand saying that in some cases that may happen going forward. If there are no variances to the, if there's no CUP or PUD, that may easily go through. The building we've continued to reference, I do believe that it's a difficult situation. The size of the building and the size of the lot and the parking that's needed and how a developer goes in and makes that happen. And this tool, I think, in that instance, to me, is a good example where we could make that work, where given the location, given the parking needs, we may have given up landscaping and several other things if they would have simply put more variance into the building. Because we're trying to make a building fit in a difficult situation, and if we could have come to and if this tool in that instance would have helped us come to a conclusion of a much better building, but given the nuances of the building and the location, we could have worked through it. So those are my personal thoughts. So as a chair this evening, I'm going to try to, I think the goal of the city council was to, in many cases, I guess kind of raise up the standards, and there's still some questions based around whether we would be adding to existing ordinances or not. I think the goal was to have variances. I think we've got some examples in things that we've voted on from the standpoint of the Enterprise car dealership, and I think Chick-fil-A and Starbucks were the city council simply asked for something a little different than what was there. And I think our goal needs to be able to try to give them that flexibility. And I think that with that, this is a great tool. And I'll get off my piece and ask you, Ms. Faulkner, what else can we give you feedback on, or have we gotten you and Alan the feedback you were looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. What I have noted here is that the specific discussion on the 50% requirement, that was part of your 2014 work plan, you're fine leaving as it is, and you'll deal with those on a case-by-case basis as they come in, as recommended by Mr. Slania. And then as far as the checklist goes, you're supportive of the checklist. I'm just going to go through this in case your motion is as modified. This is how I have it as modified. The changes we'll make when we forward this to council. Under distinct modules, under recessed and projected windows, we'll add arcades. Under the roof design, we will add a picture that has a roof that's not a flat roof. We do have a couple on some of these town office projects that have peaked roofs that we can throw in here that would probably meet our standards.
And Porter Creek does have that.
It's just, we didn't include the picture of it. Sure,
Yeah.
there's
As
another
an
one.
example, Porter Creek
Yes,
Well,
thank
is
you.
one of our
And
few
actually-
commercial
Actually,
properties.
that is Porter Creek.
Yeah.
It's just not the part with
It's
the
just
roof.
not-
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Then, I didn't see it specifically on here, and you didn't talk about it per se, but color, and we talk about accent material, we do have, but we have it more on the, as an accent material, the color, so I guess that one is covered. And then under lighting, LED lighting, we certainly can add that.
Or energy efficient, I guess,
Yes.
more than anything
Sure,
else.
that makes total sense.
I think we've tried to be more inclusive. No.
Yes, we can certainly add those elements.
Those are the corrections or modifications that I have to these. Did you have anything else, Mr. Brixius?
Mr. Thomas suggested that if we don't have a current zoning standard, we should list that we
Yes.
don't have a current zoning standard. And that's not an issue either, but that's easy to tweak.
I think the only other thing was my comment about expressing structural modules under distinct modules as well. And that to me is different, I think, because it directly works to increase the module breaks more than the minimum of every 100 feet or every 60 in HOC.
Okay, so right now it reads, divides the wall into distinct modules through the use of vertical treatments, creating variable facade depths, building offsets, columns, corner treatments, or changes in materials. And the ordinance requires 100 feet.
Right.
So anything that's less than 100 feet would be exceeds that.
Right. I'm just using it as an example for somebody in the business that might understand differently than the way it's phrased here.
So your specific wording that you're looking to be changed?
Well, divide the wall into distinct modules, i.e. expressing structural modules through the use of vertical treatments, variable facade depths, building offsets, columns. It basically is it's a word example as opposed to a photo example, I guess.
Okay. Sure, we can add that as a
Can I
clar-
are you saying that, like, if the building has if it's 99 feet, the facade, you're looking for, since it's not over 100, we're looking for some variance in that 99 feet?
As going beyond the minimum standard currently, and
I just wanted to
right,
clarify.
yeah, and a typical building might have a module of 24 or 25 feet, so you'd see something expressed on the outside of the building that might follow that, whether it's decorative or actual. It can be either.
You
I'm
said,
trying to think of a good
They're called structural modules.
Anything else?
Just so I have the right term.
Express the structural module of the building is how I would phrase it in architecture.
Mr. Chair, that's all. that
Thank you.
we have.
Thank you, staff. I would like to point out that this will go in front of the council work session on February 10th. So anybody in our viewing audience that has feedback would certainly be welcome to attend. I think the majority of the planning commission will be there. I want to step back one moment. I did skip something on the public hearing, just for the public notice this evening. The public hearing that we voted on in reference to the changes to Title 10, Chapter 22, that will go to the city council on February 3rd. That piece will be voted on February 3rd. And with that, that brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is updates. And staff, we typically put you on the board first. Do you have any updates for us?
Well, Mr. Chair, if we could go back to
Oh,
the
okay.
architectural standards, we would like a motion from the planning commission.
Oh, you do?
on
Okay.
these. Yes,
I'm sorry.
exactly, that you accept the checklist as modified, or
Commissioners, I would stand for a motion.
I would be happy to make the motion that the Planning Commission recommends that the council accept our additions and the architectural guidelines as created by staff.
Second.
Second. Motion was by Commissioner Benke and second by Commissioner Thomas. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. Sorry about
Thank
that.
you.
I forgot that we needed to have a motion. Staff, do you have any updates this evening?
I just have a couple, and coming up at your next Planning Commission agenda, we have the draft agenda out, so I'll just review those items with you. We have a CUP from the city of Burnsville that will allow grading and filling in the floodplain and shoreland districts for the regional trail along the Minnesota River. This is part of the Black Dog Road vacation and work that Excel Energy is doing in partnership with the city, so we're ready to proceed with that part of the trail. And then also, City Council heard at their last work session from developer Lintor Development for the villas in heart of the city. They're looking at altering the exterior materials on the last 4 units to be constructed. So you'll want to tune into watch that meeting if you missed it to see what the council said and what the builder said. Mr. Benke was at the meeting as well. And so that application for the PUD amendment is coming before you at your next meeting as well. And those are the updates that
Thank
I
you.
have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any updates? With that, I would stand for motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Thomas, second by Commissioner Benke. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
It's always a little different.